Hello, my name is Wade Nomura. I'm current mayor of the city of Carpinteria, also a Rotarian. Please enjoy watching The Good Life.
Welcome to Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. So glad you're with us. You can always find us at goodlifetelevision.org, where all these great interviews are placed, and then what we call power clips. We take out of those interviews some of the great moments, and so we have those power clips on there as well. People from all walks of life, business, public servants, entrepreneurs, overcomers, young people, famous people, not famous people. It's a little bit of everything, but it's the underlying theme here is that we're focused on the good stuff. We're focused on inspiring and encouraging and honoring and empowering and focusing on the good. There's plenty of negative stuff going on all the time on planet Earth, but here we're talking about the good stuff. So glad you're with us. And we see that you're joining us from all over the world on goodlifetelevision.org, which is so encouraging. So thank you. And you can also find us at all the social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, blah, 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 all of them. I'm really excited about my guest today. The mayor of, there's a great little town near where we're sitting called Carpinteria, California. And the mayor of that town, the Honorable Wade Nomura, is with me. So welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Wade has written a book that will be on your screen called Creating Destiny, which is a really interesting story of his life that I've been diving into the last couple of days. And so congratulations on the book. I want to get into that in a second, but start with kind of your growing up. I know the first part of this is your family went through some difficult stuff, but talk a little bit about that.
That is true. My family came in the 1890s, 1900s, and when World War II broke out, they were actually taken from their homes and interned into relocation centers or internment camps during that time. So they were 4 years. My family, both sides, my mother and father's side, ended up in Poston, Arizona, spent 4 years there.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so what was it like coming out of that for the next generation?
I would say the difficult part of that relocation had to do with them having to leave all of their possessions behind. Right. They weren't allowed to take anything except for what they can carry in suitcases. So once the war was over and they were given the opportunity to leave the camps, most of them had lost what they had. There was no reason to go back, so a lot of them relocated. The Nomura clan actually ended up here in the Montecito area because then international president of the Olympics, Avery Brundage, actually recruited my grandfather to be his caretaker for his estate. So that's how our clan ended up in Santa Barbara. Wow. Yeah.
It's kind of mind-boggling that happened here, you know, in your family. I mean, that's still kind of stunning to me.
It was tough times, I would say. Even though I was born after the war, we still had a lot of residue of discrimination, only because of the fact that the war was still fresh in a lot of people's minds. So I did have to deal with some discrimination in my lifetime, unfortunately, but fortunately it does get better.
Yeah. You've had a very interesting career, and of course now you're mayor, and you've been heavily involved in the Rotary, which I want to talk about, but you're a 5-time BMX champion. Where did that come from?
This is true. It's a story in itself, and that's why I had to put the book together, because of the fact it was so random what happened to me. Actually, I went to school, graduated from Cal Poly in horticulture, started my own landscaping business. And one of the early jobs that I got was working for the city to do a project development, low-income housing. And when I went there were 5 kids that came and they actually greeted me, and this was during school time, and they would spend the whole day with me while I was doing this landscape job. And I asked them, I go, aren't you supposed to be in school right now? And the answer was, well, technically yes, but unofficially we got kicked out of school. They told us not to come back because we were problem children. So I said, well, if that's the case, you're not going to bother me, but you're going to have to work for me. So I put them to work, and they started working. One day I had my motorcycle in the back of my truck, and they go, what are you going to do with that? I go, well, I'm a racer, so I practice racing motorcycles. They asked if they can go with me, so I took them out to the local track, ran a few laps with them. They loved it. They decided, when we grow up, we want to become racers. I go, well, motorcycles are expensive, but BMX is something you may want to take a look at. So they were interested in that. I ended up buying them 2 bikes. They worked for it. Well, when I say worked for it, 25 cents a day, but we multiplied it by 100 basically is what we did. I bought them 2 bikes, helmets, pads, shoes, whatever they needed to race, and I signed them up at a local track. They went out and they loved it. They were terrible at racing, by the way, but unfortunately they hadn't barely learned how to ride a bicycle, but they wanted to race. So we started that way, and that's what got me into BMX. One day they had a Father's Day race. I signed up for it, ended up winning that race by a substantial margin, which ended up being, they invited me to a national event. They said there's a national event 3 months out in Las Vegas. You'll have to race this because it's the first race ever they're going to have an old man's class, 26 and over. So I built a bike, went out there to race, and ended up winning the race, giving me my first national title. Oh so from that time I go, well, it looks like I have some aptitude and skills for this. So I continued racing, and I ended up winning 5 national titles. Turned pro at the age of 30, which was a huge mistake. My lowest ranking as a pro was number 12 in the world. But that ended up, the career beat me up enough to where I had to walk away from the sport. Fortunately, I was fairly intact, 22 broken bones and dislocations, but it was time to leave the sport. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing.
So
how long did you actually race? How many years did you race for?
About 5 years.
5 years.
Yeah.
Wow. Rotary International is an amazing organization that you've been heavily involved in, not just at the local level. You've managed and assisted and been involved in huge 200 charitable projects around the globe. You've been all over the world doing these impactful projects. Talk a little bit about Rotary and kind of its place in your life and kind of your thoughts about it.
My Rotary history is a unique one, pretty interesting in itself. My late wife was recruited to join Rotary. She started a club. We chartered a club at that time, the Carpenter Morning Club. And she came to me, and as we were charting it, she says, we need to have signatures. We need 25 signatures to charter this club. So we're stuck for 2 weeks on 24. We need the 25th one. I said, not me, don't count me in. She says, well, you got to sign it. And at that time I said no intentionally because I was with 8 other charitable foundations, and so I couldn't squeeze another one in. I signed on the dotted line, and sure enough, we became a chartering club. So that's what got me started. I didn't do it because I loved it. I did it because my company was paying for it. I got a breakfast out of it. They started a project in Mexico, and they asked if anybody was bilingual and would be able to assist in a water project in Mexico. So I signed up, said yes, I'd be happy to do it. I volunteered for it, them not realizing that this was going to be a paid trip by Rotary, and that I had never been on an airplane out of the country in my life. And I was probably in my 50s. So I signed up for a free trip, not realizing what that was going to lead to.
Wow.
We did the first project there. It was very successful. I was greeted by the people of the village, and the gentleman that was the sheriff, we call him, came over to me, shook my hand, and says, thank you for bringing us water. For us, water is life. Thank you for bringing us life.
Oh
that was life changer. That is, quote, my Rotary moment. That's why I do what I do. All of a sudden I realized it's not about me, it's what I could do for other people.
Thank you for bringing us water, because for us, water is life. That's what he said?
That's exactly what he said. He told me that in Spanish. Translated, that's what it meant.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so it was a very touching moment. It got me. It got me. So much for the free trip. I probably paid back 100 times on that trip.
Right. And then you've been involved at an international level with Rotary ever since.
That is correct. I do a lot of project evaluations for the Rotary Foundation. I am currently the project coordinator for water and sanitation projects worldwide as an evaluator.
Wow.
Yeah.
How great. We were talking about Rotary before we came on. Rotary's got an amazing history. You were mentioning they're in 200
plus countries and geographic regions, correct.
And what is the connection with the United Nations that you're mentioning?
The original seating was organized by Rotarians, and that ended up becoming the United Nations. It was a peace conference the first time around. 49 of the originally seated members were Rotarians. And to this day, we have a permanent seat on the United Nations floor.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's a very unique connection, something that Rotary's pretty proud of, but not everybody knows about.
I never knew that history of Rotary. So Rotary International is a powerful thing. Why'd you run for mayor?
This is a Rotary trick. When I say a Rotary trick, I had served on the Architecture Review Board for 18 years, almost 18 years. Okay. And I was approached by 4 different groups, interest groups, asking that I would run for city council. All 4 times I said no, I did not want to, because I didn't believe in politics. As you know, Rotary has no politics, no religion. So I didn't want to define what I was doing based on politics. So I stayed free of that one. Finally, the last group came to me and said, we want you to run for city council because we think you could do something great for the city. And I go, well, tell me about this. What could I do, and why would you want me to do it? They said, you have high integrity, high ethical standards. You are one of the hardest working people in Carpinteria that we've seen based on recent history. And because you're Rotarian, we trust you. That got me. I said, because of that, I signed on the dotted line, ran for city council. That eventually led to becoming a mayor. I was appointed within the council. I've served, now I'm on my 2nd term. One of the first times where a mayor has actually been reappointed by the council.
Is that right?
Yeah, it was quite an honor, and shows a lot of confidence in the community, so
yeah.
Appreciated it.
Carpinteria is a great town.
It's a great town.
Have you been there a long time?
Born and raised in Santa Barbara. I moved to Carpinteria right after I graduated from college.
Okay.
But I was working there in high school.
Okay,
so
that's a great town.
Yeah.
You know, you've written and talked, and I know you've worked in the area of leadership, in the area of team building, and so much rises and falls on leadership. You know, in my opinion, leadership matters. What are you mentioned integrity a second ago, but what are some of your principles, thought processes involved if you were talking to a young leader, a young person who wanted to pursue leadership and thought that they were gifted that way or had a desire to serve? How would you advise, or what are your kind of thoughts on leadership?
My grandfather was one of my chief mentors, and when I was young, he took me in his wing. I am the firstborn son of the firstborn son, making me, quote, one of the leaders of our family. One of the lessons he taught me was we went to the Brundage estate. I was about 4, maybe 5 years old, and we walked through and I looked at his gardens that he had been maintaining. He was very proud of the gardens. They were immaculate. And as we walked through, he showed me everything that he had done that week. And as we left, he goes, I want you to look back. So I turned around and looked back at the gardens. He goes, what do you see? I see a garden that's immaculate. It's impeccable. Every hedge was perfectly cut square. There is no leaf out of place. There's no weeds in there. Even the ground and gravel were raked with a pattern. I said, it's immaculate. He goes, that's your lesson for today. No matter what you do in life, always leave it better than you found it. So as I started going through life, I realized that this is the same concept or theory, philosophy we should do in leadership. Always make things better than how you found it.
Yes.
And so that's where leadership became so important to me. And I realized that perception-wise, it's not what you see that's better, but it's what other people will see that's better. Mm-hmm. And so you can't be selfish. One of the hardest things about being a leader is that you have to be impersonal. You can't take it what you think is important for you. It's what's important and benefiting everybody else.
Right.
Yeah.
Thinking about the big picture.
Exactly, exactly. And it makes it hard because for example, in politics, as a city councilman, we are one of the few people in the whole city that aren't allowed to voice our opinion because we can't have one. We have to be open-minded and objective. And that makes it very difficult because most of the time you have an idea what you want, but that becomes an agenda and you can't go forward with an agenda.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about this book. It's really interesting. It's your story. I'll just read from toward the end. He said, I titled this book Creating Destiny because I believe we can all be authors of our own story. Though remember, it might not be the story you thought you were going to write at the start. We can choose to take these paths and make the most of them. Even the darkest of days have taught me valuable lessons and an appreciation of what I have even more. Creating Destiny. That's an interesting title. Talk about that.
The Creating Destiny part came from, first of all, the story I told you about the 5 kids in the project that got me into BMX. When I worked with the 5 kids, I realized that it was a highlight in their life. They loved doing it. They had something that they were enjoying doing. There's something that they were constructive about. They were building and working hard to focus on this dream. Unfortunately, as I started getting into the national scene, I had to leave that behind because now I was traveling 120,000 miles a year. I was gone just about all the time. And so I had to leave that part of it behind. I later found out after, this is probably almost 30 years later, that the unfortunate part were the 5 kids that I was telling you about, 2 of them ended up committing suicide. The third one ended up a multiple felony offender, is in jail for life, in prison for life. The other 2 I completely lost track of. Realizing what had happened to me and what had happened to them is where I came up with the name Creating Destiny. Because had I gone in a direction I thought I wanted to go, I wouldn't have ended up where I am today. No idea. So that's why the name of the book, Creating Destiny. We can create our own destiny, but we could also be the one that ruin our own destiny.
Right.
We can go the wrong way. We could pick something that we thought was the right direction, but it's not. If you're loose, if you're able to move, be fluid with what happens to you, then things happen. I would have never been a national champion had the kids not talked me into racing a Father's Day race. Who would have thought that? I never would have built the Nomura bike that became fairly famous had that not happened either. And I had not
really good
been. So all of these things all happened. I also, 2001, I was inducted into the Japanese American Hall of Fame for my sports, for bicycles. And there were 42 of us athletes, including Olympic gold medalists, world champions, all of the above. And they asked me, what would I attribute my success to? And I started thinking about it. I go, well, you know, there's all kinds of things that worked in my favor. But the one thing that captured my thought was, it was because of the sacrifices of those people around me that I succeeded. My wife, my parents, my kids, my family, my friends, all believed in my dream, my vision, my goal. And because of that, they sacrificed for me. I never saw it when I was racing because it's such a lonely sport. But when I realized that, you know what, it's time for me to give back too, to give other people an opportunity to get their dreams achieved and accomplished.
That's beautiful. You mentioned being fluid. I like that. One of my heroes is Vin Scully, the old broadcaster of the Dodgers. Sure. And he was quoted one time as saying, if you want to make God smile, tell him your plans. You know, because life can, you know, and so being fluid and not being rigid on what path you think you're supposed, that's a really insightful thought.
I think what part of it does with that philosophy is that you will then follow the benefit to benefit others. I think that's one of the main points, because if you become focused on a goal, you think about it, that goal is selfish. It's self-centered to yourself, what you want to achieve. Mm-hmm. But if you look at how you could benefit other people, now you're moving different tracks. BMX was one. I would never have been in city council. I would never be mayor had it not been for Rotary. I would have never joined Rotary had I not been forced into joining the organization. Right. Everything just happens.
Isn't that amazing? People can get this book. Is it wadenomura.com?
Correct, yes.
Okay, wadenomura.com, and it's Creating Destiny. I commend it to you. One theme I sense through your life is service. And I in fact, my dad, I'm not going to try to quote one of his favorite quotes from Albert Schweitzer about service, but because I'll butcher it. But there's the quote in essence talks about how the happiest people that you see are those that have discovered how to serve. And sometimes I think with young people, we're so busy talking about achievement that we miss service. Achieve, climb the ladder. Where the joy is over here, you know, in service.
Right.
I'm just freewheeling here, but talk about service in your life, because it seems like something has happened in you. Like when that guy says to you, "Thank you for bringing us water," yeah. That was a profound moment.
That was a profound moment.
Where if you hadn't been serving, that would never have happened. That was life-changing.
It was life-changing. True. I think the focus of becoming service-oriented has to do more with an awareness of what you could do to assist other people, to help other people. And that awareness then gives you that drive, that determination to be able to give to others what you have. I realized through Rotary mostly that I had 2 ways to go through life. Number one is I set a goal for myself and I become what I would consider at that time successful. Money, nice house, houses, nice cars, you know, have everything you need, and you're comfortable with life. However, that changed when I went into Rotary, because all of a sudden now it's like, wait a minute. From that time where I've given this gentleman life, I realized that I could influence and make a greater impact throughout the world as I serve other people.
Yeah.
It's not about a house, it's not about a car, because that just goes away when you pass away.
Right.
But the impacts you have and the changes that you made in other people's life, that will last forever. And that's, I think, what I looked at as, quote, creating my legacy, is making sure that I'm able to influence, assist, and help people around the world. Currently, this is not a brag, this is through Rotary, I've been able to probably impact over 2 million lives around the world.
Wow.
And this is by just being involved, by being fluid.
Yeah. Beautiful. So the moral of the story is buy the book and join Rotary. Those are our 2 goals. Fascinating life, great story. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure meeting you also, and thanks for having me on the show.
Appreciate
Appreciate
it. Thank you for coming. We'll see you next time. Inspired. Welcome to Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. So glad you're with us. You can always find us at goodlifetelevision.org. So many of you have joined us there from all over the world, and we're grateful. The purpose here is to inspire, to honor, to encourage, to educate, and to empower. And we've had so many wonderful guests that have done those things. We've been inspired by stories of people you've never heard of, some people you have heard of, some of them in between, young and old, all walks of life, all professions. So it's been a really wonderful journey we've been on. So thank you for being here with us. I'm really excited about my guest today. He's a dear friend, in addition to being a corporate executive, and you're going to hear the rest of the story in a moment. John Mullen is with me. John, welcome.
Great to be here.
John is Bachelor of Science from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo in Civil Engineering, and a Master's in Global Leadership from Fuller Seminary. That's kind of an interesting combination. That really summarizes you in some ways. that combination, Civil Engineering and Global Leadership from Fuller Seminary.
Well, I wasn't a great civil engineer, so I moved on to the spiritual side to try that.
Good. John's companies over the years have grossed over $500 million in sales, and so John was really successful in business. But that's actually not even the most interesting part of the story. But let's start with your life, though. Let's start with kind of your growing up, what it was like for you coming up, and your family of origin. Start there.
Sure. So we moved down here to Santa Barbara when I was 7 years old, and my dad was an entrepreneur. He died at 92 years old, and he was still entrepreneuring at 92. And so he was an incredible inspiration in my life. And when I was growing up in Santa Barbara, you know, because we're a beach community, all of my friends would surf, right, when I was a teen. Well, my dad had me working at his factory. So my dad manufactured furniture, so I would spend 8 hours a day, I think making $2 an hour during my summer working for my dad. Wow. But during that time, I was able to just watch him. He was incredibly gifted. He was an industrial designer. And so I just sat back and saw this incredible model in my life of someone who cared deeply about what he was doing. And so as I was growing up and getting older, you know, I began to kind of look at, well, you know, what do I want to do with my life? And I knew that I didn't want to follow exactly in his footsteps, but I knew I wanted to go to college. It's really interesting because when I was I tell my kids this story, when I was in 6th grade at Monroe School in Santa Barbara, I ran for president. And I still remember who I ran against. I still remember all that happened. I didn't win. I lost. And I told my kids, I said, you know, I lost as president, so later on I built my own companies and named myself president. So it all worked out.
Right, one way or the other.
Yeah, yeah.
And didn't your dad, weren't you like 33 or something, and your dad came to you and said, Johnny, it's your time?
Yeah, I graduated from Cal Poly University in civil engineering, came to Santa Barbara and worked as a civil engineer, and then began with a land development company, because my desire was ultimately to become a real estate developer. And around when I was 32 years old, working for this land development company owned by a family, they decided to wind down the operations. And I still remember, like at that time, just, what am I going to do? And I called my dad, and at that point my dad was in Chicago, and we're on the phone, and he just said, Johnny, it's your time. And I said, well, what do you mean, Dad? He said, look, you've got this entrepreneurial blood. It's time for you to start your own company. So literally, as I was winding down from that company, I still remember I was in their offices, and this was a point where there were now computers and printers, and I'm printing out my resume, I'm printing out all these proposals. While I'm winding down in this one company, I'm starting up a new business. And so that was the beginning of JM Consulting Group, which I always said, well, it was only me, but it will ultimately grow. And it did. It grew into about 250 employees.
That's incredible. And so you had the JM Consulting, and then you had the development side, where you've done a ton of residential, 500 homes or 700 residential homes in Southern California.
Yeah, so in the 90s, while I was doing real estate consulting, the wireless, the FCC began to issue licenses for wireless phones. And so if you remember, in the early 90s, we started getting these cell phones. We moved into that industry, so I became a wireless telecom consultant, and that grew our business in the 90s. And then in the mid-90s, my dream was to do real estate development, and so I formed JM Development. So we had two companies, and then in the 2000s, we were building about 100 homes a year in the Central Coast.
Yeah, the wireless phone thing kind of stuck.
Yeah.
Turns out.
Yeah, it sure did.
Let's fast forward to 2002. And talk about your journey with some of this, I don't know if I want to call it mission work, but some of this overseas work that you've done, specifically around the country of Mozambique, which I didn't know a lot about. I did read a little bit about the cyclones and the poverty and the landmines. And that 11% of girls go beyond elementary school, and it was interesting to read about this. But you ended up in Mozambique in 2002. Start there and kind of tell us what that was about,
Sure.
And then we can kind of go from there.
Yeah. So at that time, I was in my late 40s. I had been very successful in business, and I literally was close to retirement if I would choose to retire. And so, and I had been involved in, some mission work, like we all do, go on a 3-day trip, but I'd never really gone to a third world country. And I was invited to go to Mozambique. I didn't know a lot about Mozambique. Literally, I had to look at it on a map to find out where it was, and found out it was one of the poorest countries in the world. I agreed to go on this missions trip with my friend Douglas Bowman, and I remember, this kind of evolving revelation of Mozambique. Initially, it's like, this will be a great trip. This will be fun. I'll tag this on to what I've already done, my successful career. And I remember, as I found out more and more, I found out, well, this is a country that's gone through civil war. It's a country that's had massive flooding. In a country where there was 1 million landmines that were laid in the ground. So I start getting this fear about going down to Mozambique. Right. At that point, I can't back out. And so I remember Douglas and I flew to Atlanta, and we're about to get on the plane in Atlanta. We were going with a missions organization. And I'm at the counter, to pick up my seats. And this woman goes, Mr. Mullen, I know that you had tickets in row 15A, and I had flown enough, you know, a 747-400 to know that that's in business class. And I thought, this is a great missions organization. She goes, Mr. Mullen, I'm sorry, we've made a big mistake. You're not in 15A. You're in the middle of row 73. Now, I remember walking down that aisle all the way to the back of the plane, you know, clutching my overnight bag like it was a life preserver. And I literally am going, where am I going? And I ended up in the back of the plane in the middle seat. And I finally get myself into that middle seat, and I've got a guy to the right of me and a guy to the left of me, and they're both going on this missions trip. And I turn to the guy at the right, and I'm looking at him. He's missing a finger on one of his hands. And I turn to him and I said, hey, I know we're going to the same place. My doctor told me if I take the malaria medication, I'll just be fine, you know, I'll be safe. And he looks back at me and goes, you know, I was a missionary for 6 years in East Africa. I took the medication. I still got malaria. So now I'm convinced I'm going to die. I'm going to die in this third world country that I know nothing about. I turn to my left, and there's this big oversized guy that's spilling over into my seat. And I remember when the plane was ready to go, there was a seat available I could see that was a window seat. And I thought, gosh, I want that seat. And so I turned to him and I say, hey, I can give you a little bit more room, and you know, I'm going to go get that seat. And he turns to me and he puts his arm around and he goes, no way, I want to get to know you. And so I'm going, really? I'm stuck 17 hours between these two. I'm sandwiched between these two guys. And so, you know, we flew down to Cape Town, and then from Cape Town to Johannesburg, and then we flew into Mozambique. And I remember, you know, I just thought, I'm going to my death. I mean, like, I'm not going to survive in this country. And so we get there, we arrive in Maputo, Mozambique, which is the capital. And we're going to a place in Sempeto where this conference center is, but where they have a children's center. And I remember arriving there, and they took us out to see this dump site in the middle of the city. And you got to realize, like in Mozambique, I mean, this is a country where the average person lives on about $1.50 a day. So it's an extremely poor country. And they take us out to this dump site, and at this dump site, people, I mean, it's not a dump site like we're used to. This is a dump site where people live in the dump. They literally live there. And so they live in cardboard houses. The trash trucks come in. They're climbing, you know, all over the trash trucks trying to get food. And this is how these people live. And I remember there was a phrase that they would use, that this ministry would use, and it was stop for the one. And what they said was, look, we're going to stop for that one person that's in front of us, the one person that's broken, the one person that's an amputee. That's the person we're going to focus on. And it just really, really stuck with me. So we were there for 10 days just watching this ministry. And it was changing my heart. I mean, I literally was realizing, like, I've never experienced this before in my life. And it was just amazing. We get to the last night, and we had been at a village the day before, and I had eaten some food, and I was very sick. This is the night before we're going to leave and come back home. And they line up everybody on this concrete wall because the head of this ministry, Heidi Baker, was going to come and pray for everyone. And I thought, yeah, I need prayer, and I'd like her to pray for me. So I'm waiting, and she never gets to me. But 3 13-year-old Mozambican boys, they come and they lay a prayer cloth on me. And they lay hands on me, and as they begin to pray over me, I just start weeping, and I can't stop weeping. And I realize, like, God has brought me halfway around the world. And I've been a Christian for 20 years, but he brought me halfway around the world that I might meet Jesus. And I met Jesus right there because I realized, as wealthy as I was coming from the United States, I was poor. And he was calling me to be a person who was poor in spirit. So that was my first encounter with Mozambique.
Wow. That's amazing. Let's go to 2015, and then I want to get back to that in terms of what happened to you. But so 2015, you end up reconnecting with Douglas Bowman. You're taking a walk on the beach, in Santa Barbara and kind of take us from there in terms of what happened and how we get to this story, which, by the way, I will mention now, John, they've written a great book that I was reading last night called Florencia. We're going to talk about Florencia in a second, but I commend it to you. It's a really great book. But take us 2015 and how we got to Florencia.
Douglas and I were on the trip in 2002 in Mozambique, and then we both come back, and our lives kind of, move away from one another. He goes to New Zealand as a pastor. I continue in business in the early 2000s, kind of go back to what I was doing, and he went back to what he was doing beforehand. And in 2015, we reconnect. He comes back to Santa Barbara, and I haven't seen him for quite some time. And we begin to just take these walks. And as we're walking, we are reminiscing about what happened in Mozambique and realizing like this was a pivotal moment in both of our lives. So we think, well, let's write a book. Let's write a book about our experience in Mozambique. And really from sort of a Westerner perspective, it was really, let's write a selfie book. Let's write a book about ourselves, because we think all these people are going to be interested in who we are. And
my road to humility.
Well, yeah, I know. My
5 secrets to success.
Yeah, exactly. Humble. And so we began to write this book. We wrote 13 chapters of this book. And we're starting, we're in chapter 13, we're starting to really look into Mozambique and look into these floods and look into the depth of the poverty. And one of the things we come upon is that these landmines were in Mozambique. And so these were landmines that had been put in the ground because there was a civil war that was going on. So they're putting them in the ground regarding the opposing army, right? But they're left there, and they're left there for years. And so now, and a landmine's not discriminating. It doesn't know who's above the ground. And so now they're sitting in the waterways, they're sitting in the pathways, and civilians are stepping on these landmines. And it's just devastating what's going on in this country. So as we're doing our research, we find this article in National Geographic. It's an article on the demining efforts in Mozambique that are taking place. And in those demining efforts, they're talking about women going into demining, helping to demine the country, and going from $1.50 a day to $10 a day. And we thought, gosh, this is great. Well, the last paragraph of that article, as if it's an afterthought, they tell us about this 17-year-old girl, Florencia. They show us a picture of her, and they tell us her story. And in her story, we learn that she was out collecting firewood. She lived in a village, Macachula, in Mozambique. She's out collecting firewood, and it's just a regular day, and she's reaching to get a piece of firewood, and she steps on a landmine, and it blows off her leg. And it's just there's this massive gnarled flesh. She's lying there, and all her mother sees from her hut is this smoke rising, off in the distance. And they run, and they find Florencia. She's lying on the ground, and she's half dead. And this paragraph is telling us about her story as a kind of an afterthought, And Douglas and I read that, and we thought, how can we write a selfie book and not tell her story? How can we not find her? Like, we need to locate this woman. We need to bring her help, And so that began this journey in finding Florencia.
And it's amazing she survived. Didn't they have to drive 4 hours to the hospital?
They had to take her 4 hours because in Macachula, like even when we went back down there, you're driving off the road into the sand, going to the bush country, and you realize, it's not like America. They're not heading over to CVS to pick up their medication. They're not heading over to Cottage Hospital to receive care. They have to be taken, somewhere 2 to 4 hours away. And again, she's dying in the back of a pickup truck while this is all taking place.
When she stepped on the landmine, her leg was blown off. She had cashews in her pocket. The cashews fell on the ground, and we'll get back to that at the end.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind, cashews falling on the ground. Now, you read the article, let's do something, let's find her. You rally a group of students from the local high school who want to help, want to go on the trip, and take us from there.
Yeah, so what really happens is we take the article and we look at it and we go, first of all, who wrote the article? Well, we find out that the woman who wrote the article was Claudia Sangel. She was an adjunct professor at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And we're like, we can't believe this for National Geographic. So we contact her, we write her an email, and she writes back. And all we say is, hey, we're two guys here in Santa Barbara. We learned about Florencia. You did an article on her, which means you went down there. We'd like to help her. We'd like to help her in some way, in some manner. And she writes back and she says, hey, if you want to help her, here's the contact in Mozambique. His name's Adorito Ismael. Now, he was with Handicap International, and he was a D minor, but he was the one who originally brought Claudia up to Macachula to interview Florencia. So we contact Adorito Ismael. Now, this is a guy that is busy. He's got a lot going on. We don't hear anything back. It's 2 weeks later. And finally, he's looking at his emails and he sees our email. And he realizes, oh my gosh, there's these two guys that are in California and they want to help Florencia. So he spends 2.5 days out of his schedule and goes up into her village to find her. When he finds her, he takes a letter from us to say, introduce who we are and to say, we'd like to help her get a prosthetic leg. So he's with her and he's talking with her and he says, these guys would like to help you get a prosthetic leg. And her response to that was, what's a prosthetic leg? She had no idea, because in Mozambique, those who are amputees often crawl on the ground, or they have makeshift crutches, but they don't have the technology. They don't know about a prosthetic leg. So anyway, but he said, look at Florencia, there's two guys in California that want to help you walk. Do you want to walk again? And she nodded. She had her little son, Gildo, who she couldn't carry. And she, really, her life had been completely just cut off and limited because she was an amputee. So we found Florencia through Adorito. And then from that point, we began to look at, okay, how do we promised something here, how do we deliver on our promise? Well, the tough news was that it would cost $12,000 to $15,000 to get a prosthetic leg in Mozambique. And we just thought, well, we don't even know where to begin. We don't know what to do. So the second thing we did is we got back on Google. We began to look at free prosthetic legs. Like, is there anyone in this world who is giving out free prosthetic legs? We'll get one, we'll get her there, and we'll get her a leg. We found this clinic in India, Jaipur Foot Clinic, and as we began to learn about it, we were just amazed. The guy who runs it is Dr. Mehta, and I was telling you earlier, he's like a modern day Gandhi. This is a non-profit organization. So if you live in India and you are an amputee, and there's lots of amputees in India just because of the traffic accidents and other things. If you're an amputee in India, you can get on the train anywhere in India, and you can bring your family, and you can arrive in Jaipur and come to the Jaipur Foot Clinic. You don't need an appointment. You just walk up, and you will be taken care of. They will put your family up, and for after 2 to 3 days, you will walk out of that clinic with a prosthetic leg for free. Okay. We were just amazed. So we wrote Dr. Mehta, and we got an immediate response. And here's what he said. He said, I love your story. this is an incredible story that you two would go halfway around the world to rescue this woman. He said, bring her to Jaipur. We will put a leg on her. She will walk out of this place.
So amazing.
So we just to end that part of it, we began to go to the local high school, and we knew Dan Williams, who headed the Matt Academy at Santa Barbara High School, and we said, hey, as we go on this trip, we really would like to bring some students with us that may be interested in film, that may be interested in, just letting the world know what this journey is about, and we'd love them to come with us. So we had 5 students that signed up with us, and 2 of them were young filmmakers out of Santa Barbara High School. And so they began this process with the idea that they were going to actually film a documentary. So they were on the trip. The second part of that, I'm an alumni of Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and I contacted Cal Poly to say, hey, do you have any engineers in your program up here that would like to be part of this journey? So we began to work with the senior engineers at Cal Poly, and Cal Poly became very interested in this project. In fact, the president of Cal Poly loved what was going on, and we had 5 of those senior engineers come on this trip as well. So now we have 5 students that are high school students, 5 engineering students, and they're all coming with us on this journey. Now, we got to go down to Mozambique and pick her up, and then we've got to bring her up to Jaipur, in order for her to receive a leg.
Unbelievable. And that had to have been a transformational trip for those students as well. But long story short, she gets the leg. And I watched a video of her walking back into her village and seeing the reactions of the people in her village is just powerful. And there was a cashew tree. Those cashews that were in her pocket went into the ground, and actually a tree emerged. And I was just thinking about, there's so much depth to that one part of that book, just that out of brokenness, it's like the seed going into the ground. A seed can sit on this table for 75 years and nothing happens. And it goes in the ground and magic happens. There's something about dying, there's something about that. I thought about that story about the cashews going into the ground, and then now we have this fruit. I mean, it's amazing what happened to you. And that's one of the things that I think is I mean, it was inspiring to me that here's a guy who has made it up the ladder, made the money, had success, family, the kids, the house, everything, beautiful city, everything is kind of in order, and yet, maybe the seed was still on the ground, on the table, and then, but then through this experience, there's a brokenness that happened, is the way you described it to me. But talk a little bit more kind of about what happened in your heart. I mean, and what's it been like since? Because clearly you haven't forgotten this. Clearly this is still, the 2002 experience, and then of course what's happened since. But clearly that 2002, that breaking, that encounter you had with Jesus has not faded away. No. And you can't forget it, but talk about it a little bit.
Well, let me begin with the cashew, and that is that at that moment in time when she went to collect the firewood, she had these cashews. Now, if you look just on Google and you look up cashew trees in Mozambique, there's cashew trees all over the country. I mean, and they sell them, and as you're driving on the roads, they have them hanging from bags. But she had a couple cashews in her pocket, and it drops out. It goes into the ground. And so when we all went back there in 2015, and we had all the students surrounding, and we came around the area where she had lost her leg, where the landmine had blown up her leg, there's a beautiful cashew tree. And it's and we end our book talking about that because it really is the story, not just of Florencia, but it's our story. It's my story, and I think it's a lot of people's story, and that is, you know, something has to die in us in order for there to be life. And I know that it was interesting when I came back from Mozambique because at some level I was a changed person, but I needed to, my cashew needed to die more in the ground over the coming years. So I became one of the largest boutique builders here in Santa Barbara, and we got to 2008. And I remember it well, like in the downturn in the economy and that recession that we went through, it was as if I now was going to descend to a deep, dark place. I was a very wealthy person. I lived in Hope Ranch, which is a beautiful community here in Santa Barbara. And it came, what happened to me was I had to come to a place where I was working deals out with the banks. I was basically coming from my high place, and God had a plan for me. And I think when I think of the kingdom of God as a CEO of some companies, I think, you know, we often live in this world or this narrative where we're in a top-down, you know, a CEO, and then we have all these employees, and we have the people who serve us. Well, the kingdom of God is an inverted pyramid. It's a kingdom where Jesus says, no, it isn't about being on top. It's about who can rush to the bottom the fastest. And yet we don't realize that in this American culture. And so I literally was forced into that place where I'm selling things, I'm selling assets. I had, you know, rentals. All of this was sold in 2008, 2009, 2010.
Can I say something?
Yes.
Right
Yeah.
Because I was talking to somebody who knows you. I've never told you this, and he was describing that period. He said, John Mullen is an honorable man. He walked into those banks and did the right thing. He was just talking about how you handled. The 2008 was a bloodbath for everybody. In terms of this industry. But he said he just mentioned that to me one time. He's like, he did the honorable. He did the right thing. He did not leave, just cut and run. He was, which I thought. Anyway, I just wanted to tell you that.
Well, I appreciate that. But going through it at the time, it was very, very difficult because we're raising our kids. We're living here in Santa Barbara. And Santa Barbara, like a lot of wealthy communities, is an uppity community. It's like, what car are you driving? What like the clothes on your back. Do you shop at Nordstrom's? All of this, right? And it's like I'm in this free fall, and it's like, well, who am I going to become? And I think during that time, I believe one of the questions that I was asking God is, God, who do you want to be for me right now? Like, who do you want to be for me? And I felt like he said, I want to be that. I want to be your Savior like I was in Mozambique in 2002. Wow. I want you to walk with me in the brokenness of your life. And as I began to walk in that brokenness, I realized I'm a wealthy man. Yeah. Like, I'm the wealthiest guy on the planet. I'm wealthy. I'm just wealthy in the things that God has given me in his kingdom and the resources in my life with my family, but just knowing Jesus at a deep level. And I feel like, so many of my friends that have been wealthy, and nothing against wealth, they have not descended through those dark places of being the cashew that goes into the ground. Right. And I think God wants to take us there because he wants us to meet Jesus.
Yes. Yeah, it can be so hard when you have money and power. The scripture says it, but the reason is because you're insulated, protected, you have insurance on your insurance, and so to become a broken person is a really tricky thing. Unless barring something like what happened to you. And I will say that John has done some amazing things in the community, and one of them is called Believer's Edge, where for 11 years he taught 400 lessons on life and leadership to men, transforming lots of men in the community. So I wanted to mention that as well. I mean, that's been a wonderful fruit of all this. But last thing, we only have a couple minutes, but identity. I always think about identity. And I think what we've just described sounds a little bit like, you know, I always talk about the fake ID. You know, the fake IDs we all carry around.
Right.
You know, the fake ID that says that I'm the businessman. I'm the, even you can, I think you can even idolize your family. I mean, or have your ID being in, I'm the dad of these perfect children, you know, which we're all broken up pretty quickly. Sure. But the fake IDs, it's kind of like, you know, trading those in for the real one, the son, the beloved. Talk a little bit about that and kind of what happened for you.
Well, you know, I would say when I look at the scriptures, you know, I mean, I probably don't have a favorite scripture, but I have a favorite theme, and it's being the beloved son. And you know, I think how for in the New Testament, you know, how to the Jew, you know, they're watching this person Jesus, right? And he starts talking to his father and using the word Abba, like daddy. Now this is a radical term, you know, because they felt so distant from their Father in heaven. And I think of that one scene where John the Baptist is baptizing Jesus, right? And Jesus comes out of the water, and the heavens open, and the Father says, "This is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased." And what I love about that image is that Jesus hadn't accomplished anything. He didn't have any degrees, didn't have a successful business, didn't have 250 employees. He was just a son. And the Father said, I am pleased in you. And I think of that story and think that I have received that from my Father in heaven, that like my identity is not in my business. It's not in the things that I do. It's who I am. So my Father has said, look, you're my beloved Son. I'm pleased in you. So I came to a place in my life where I realized he can't love me any more than he loves me right now. Like I'm a beloved son, and we all are. You're beloved sons and daughters of our Father in heaven. And when I think of my life that way, I think, you know, I, of all men, you know, am wealthy beyond anything I could ever imagine. So there's nothing in this world that can reach that level of my Father saying, "You're my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased."
John has a TED Talk. Can people access that?
Yes.
How do they find it?
It's a TEDx talk at Oaks Christian.
Right. It's a TEDx talk at Oaks Christian where John tells this story of Florencia, and then she comes on stage, and I'm getting chills just talking about it. It's magical. So watch it. We'll put the link up. And again, I want to, before we go, I wanted to mention, so Florencia, this is the book is called Florencia, An Accidental Story. Douglas Bowman and John D. Mullen. I think you'll love it. We're going to have some of these at the Turner Foundation as well. So if you need to get a hold of us, we'd love to get you a copy. But it's Florencia, and it's a beautiful, beautiful book. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
This is
it's been a pleasure.
What a wonderful story. What a wonderful journey you've been on.
And if I could just thank you for the Turner Foundation, because you know, some years ago, I met you, and brought my children down to the village apartments, and just was able to minister alongside you. It's just been amazing to see what your foundation has done in this city. Oh,
thank you. Yeah, I remember that. Somebody asked me the other day, "How did you meet John Mullen?" I said, "I think he just walked in the door."
Yeah, I do.
Maybe God sent him. I don't know, but he was like he just walked in, and I remember learning from you so much, and it was powerful for me then and now. So thank you for the impact you've had in my life. You've really impacted my life a lot.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. We're having this moment on
we
TV.
We are.
All right. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time.